The evening began like any other dinner gathering, with my wife, Claire, insisting that I go with her. Her friends, whom I recognized from the practice, grinned and nodded appropriately, allowing them to speak. I acknowledged that I was the unimportant, extra in Claire's world, but I wasn't prepared for this. The red wine smacked my face. The warmth of Claire's fingers moved across my cheek and dripped onto my collar before I even noticed it. The faint background chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade as the liquid soaked into my shirt, and for a brief moment, the entire room froze, except for Claire's laughter. It was incisive, not apprehensive or contrite, filled with a kind of laughter that made it clear to everyone that she meant it. "Why do you always act like such a fool?" she snarled, tilting the wine glass in her palm as though considering tossing the rest. Some of her friends laughed into their napkins, while others exchanged glances, unsure whether to join in. They appeared uncomfortable, but they were too afraid to speak. So I sat there. I felt the wine seep into my skin, its acidic aroma filling my nostrils. Every instinct screamed at me to react, to defend myself, to throw the fucking wine back in her face. But instead, I grabbed a tissue and gently wiped my face. This wasn't the first time Claire had made me feel ashamed, and the embarrassment cut deeper than the sting of alcohol. Publicly speaking, it wasn't even the worst thing she had done. And yet something in the way she looked at me. I could feel all of their eyes on me, waiting to see what I would do. Was I going to lash out? Storm off? Laugh it off and let Claire win again? I did none of those things. I inhaled deeply, straightened my posture, and placed my napkin on the table. Without a word, I got to my feet, adjusted my clothes as best as I could, and turned away, feeling as though the restaurant floor stretched endlessly beneath me. I heard Claire laughing, probably making a snide remark as I stepped out, whispers, following me, criticizing my exaggerated behavior, but I didn't care. By the time I reached my car, my hands were steady, not shaking. With hesitation, I opened the door, got into the driver's seat, and let the silence settle around me. The scent of wine clung to me, but it wasn't just the wine I smelled. It was the end of this evening, the end of this shame. Drove on autopilot, pulling out of the parking lot as cutting remarks from the past few months, if not the past few years, replayed in my mind. Claire had treated me like I was just another fixture in our house. Dismissals covered up as jokes, belittling disguised as teasing. It had been happening for a long time, seeping into our marriage like rust on metal, and I had allowed it. But this time, I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to let Claire sweet-talk her way out of it. I wasn't going to wake up tomorrow and pretend it never happened. I wasn't going to accept a pointless apology gift meant to smooth things over. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had already decided. This wasn't just another cruel joke. This was the final straw. I entered the house and locked the door, behind me. The scent of home filled my lungs, a home that for a long time had felt more like hers than ours. I passed by the framed wedding pictures, past the expensive decor Claire had demanded. She had built her perfectly curated life on my silence, but tonight, I wasn't going to be silent. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the darkened screen of my laptop. In the weak glow of the room, I could just make out my reflection of a man I barely recognized. I opened the laptop and took out a notepad. I barely realized what I was doing, and then, click. I opened my pen, and I began writing. Not a letter, not a grievance, not an angry outburst, a list of all the insults, the humiliations, the things Claire had done to me, dates, remarks, moments I had swallowed my pride for the sake of keeping the peace, things I had forced myself to forget, but I had never truly forgotten. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about hurting her. This was about remembering, because for too long I had convinced myself that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe she didn't mean it, that maybe Claire was just being Claire. But as I looked down at the ink staining the pages, I realized something. It was never me. It was always her, and it was finally over. I wasn't surprised when Claire didn't come home right away. She loved attention too much to leave the party early, especially after her little performance. She was probably basking in the laughter, the applause, the moment. I sat in the dark kitchen, replaying the way her fingers had thrown that wine in my face. It hadn't always been this way. Once, our home had been warm, filled with laughter, quiet conversations that stretched into the night, but that was years ago. Now the silence was suffocating. The list in front of me had grown. Each line felt like a reopened scar. Her insults had started as jokes, playful teasing, something I could laugh off, but they had grown sharper, more pointed, until they weren't jokes at all. God, you're embarrassing. You always ruin things. You're pathetic. Erosion. Slow. Relentless. Erosion. Until I could no longer recognize the man staring back at me in the mirror. This was it. The undeniable truth I had been denying for too long. Claire didn't love me. Claire didn't respect me. And I would never let her humiliate me again. When she finally came home, she wasn't expecting me to be sitting at the table. She hesitated in the doorway, her sneer faltering for the first time in a long time. "Oh, come on, you're not still upset about that, are you?" she scoffed, tossing her purse onto the counter. It was a joke. Everyone laughed. I didn't respond. Instead, I slid the notepad toward her. She frowned, confused. For the first time, Claire was silent. Her usual snark didn't come. No dismissive wave of her hand, no scoffing laugh. For the first time, Claire didn't have control, and she knew it. I met her gaze evenly, and she realized this time was different. "I've come to the realization that you don't love me, Claire. Instead, you adore control and having someone to denigrate. I didn't hold up a hand, so don't use someone to feel superior to." She swallowed. "So don't make fun of me by acting that way." I sat back and watched again. I'm not petty, but I'm finished. "So, I won't post the video if that's what you're afraid of." I let out a leisurely breath, assuming she hesitated. What does that mean? Things would change because Claire wasn't used to me refusing to back down and standing my ground. "Play along," she murmured as she pushed off, trying to hide her discomfort with apathy. But I could see straight through it. She pivoted and marched out of the kitchen. "You want to play this little game? Be my guest." I didn't have to stop her since, for the first time in our marriage, Claire was the one leaving. Claire was unsure. She rushed up the stairs, each step heavy and filled with annoyance. She anticipated that I would pursue her, follow her around, try to resolve the issue, plead for an apology that would never come. I would call her out when she crossed a line, and she would deflect as I tried to make things more amicable. The cycle would continue. But this time, I remained in one place. Claire believed she was in charge of this situation. She picked up my coffee, took a leisurely sip, and let the hush descend around me. But she was unaware of how much I had already retracted, because she had been out embarrassing me. I had been busy. Last night, I took my phone out of my pocket and accessed the banking app. The numbers were precise. Half of our joint savings, which I had left, was now safely in my own account. Legally speaking, Claire had always handled the money, not because I couldn't, but rather because she enjoyed doing so. She appreciated being aware of how much money was being spent, where it was going, and, most importantly, how much control she had over it. She was in charge of the finances, the bills, the credit cards. She Made sure I never had enough to make myself self-sufficient, but always had enough to keep me comfortable. Yet last night, I froze our joint account, transferred my half, denied her access to my credit card. If she wanted money, she would need to take it from her own funds. I switched my phone off and locked it so Claire wouldn't discover it. Returning to my laptop, I had already written the required emails to my lawyer. Just very basic questions. Although it wasn't legal yet, our marriage was about to end because I was done. And I wasn't going to be her doormat any longer. I wasn't going to be the guy she made fun of in front of her friends. Sharp thud reverberated from upstairs, possibly indicating that Claire had slammed something, giving me the affirmation I needed. She may have been upset about the dresser drawer, but it was okay to let her be upset. She had based our entire marriage on the notion that I would always be there, regardless of how cruel she was, that I would put up with the cutting insults, the contemptuous looks, the way she addressed me as though I were a burden rather than her spouse. But the instant she became aware that she was losing control, the moment she sensed the ground shifting beneath her, the panic would start. But I didn't have to wait for her to come pounding down the stairs. She returned, holding her phone in her hand. Her face was composed. Her eyes burned with annoyance. Held my coffee firmly in one hand and didn't immediately glance up, allowing her to stand there. Shifting from foot to foot, waiting for me to acknowledge her. When I finally looked up, something was off. She gave a little laugh, but it was hollow. "You think you're smart, don't you?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." She lifted her phone slightly. "My card was denied." I took another sip of coffee. "That's unfortunate." Her jaw clenched. "What did you do?" "I put down my drink. I secured my money." Her nostrils flared. She sneered. "You think you can just take—" I let my fingers tap against the table. "I'm entitled to half of our money, Claire. Like how you've been purchasing items you never even informed me about while on vacation with your friends using our money." "Oh my God." She rolled her eyes. "You're still on that?" I shook my head. It wasn't just that one night. Years of the same disdain, the same humiliation, the same treatment. She looked at me with her lips pressed into a narrow line. "So you're just going to punish me and cause me pain because your ego was hurt?" I grinned. "No, I'm just done letting you control my life." Her arms crossed. "You're being dramatic." I shrugged. "Maybe." Her eyes darted, trepidation, uncertainty. She didn't like this. Didn't like that I wasn't responding as I usually did, that she couldn't gaslight me into believing I was the problem. She let out a sharp breath. "So, what now?" I studied her. "I'm preparing my future." "Without you?" She gave a brief, sour laugh. "Oh, please. You wouldn't last a week without me." Her phone rang. She looked down at it.